But,
Yeah.
personally, I don't think that a company's quest for AI should endanger people's access to clean and affordable water. And that's really important. Unfortunately, water infrastructure isn't a very sexy policy issue and never has been. And so a lot of water infrastructure is old and needs to be updated and replaced. And this is just going to put an incredible strain on it.
You never know where your client's gonna get their information from. The next generation is so social media savvy that they might see a TikTok that really resonates with them, and they might or they might be caught in an algorithm that just really knows them very well, and they're gonna come to you as their financial advisor and say, "I have a problem. Can you solve this problem?" And if your answer is no, well, they're gonna find somebody who can solve their problem. It's as simple as that. Welcome, everybody, to Inside the Flows, episode 13. I'm your host, Iyassu, and I have a very special guest with me today, Leslie Samuelrich, president of the Green Century Funds. Welcome, Leslie.
Hi, Yasu. Hi, everyone.
Leslie is an amazing, amazing guest that we have here today. She's not only the president of the Green Century Funds, she's also the board member of US SIF. And I think I've served with you since, what was it, 2000 and, I don't know, was it 2017, Leslie, when I first
Been a
started?
while. Yeah.
Yeah.
Been
Yeah.
great.
I remember you first showing me the ropes of what it means to be a board member. It was my first time being a board member at USIF, and I mean, you had it down right. I was very impressed.
Well, I'm glad I could help you along because now you're great. You're the vice chair.
Yeah, and no, thanks. Yeah, I learned from the best, right?
Well, that's very sweet.
We're very fortunate to have you here on the show. This is going to be a really good show for audience members. No inflows AI update this time. Today we're going to talk all things sustainability. So I'm really excited to have Leslie, who is and her firm Green Century pioneers in the sustainable investing space. So really excited to have you on, Leslie.
Thanks. Thanks so much for having me.
Just so our audience members can get a good grasp of you, Leslie, do you want to just kind of introduce yourself to them and your background and Green Century and what you all do, all the amazing work that you do out there in the field?
Yeah, I'd love to. So, as you also said, I'm Leslie Samuelrich. I'm the president of the Green Century Funds. We've been around 30 years, and we've always been focused on sustainable investing, particularly environmentally responsible investing. We offer mutual funds to folks and to individuals as well as institutions. And we have a three-part approach. First is we follow screening and exclusionary investing. And so our goal is to keep people's investments out of the most environmentally dangerous industries or companies. So to do that, we have things like fossil fuel screens against factory farms, against weapons. And then in some of our funds, we're starting to use the UN Sustainable Development Goals, another acronym in the field of SDGs. And it's totally fine if you've never heard of that. But following things like climate, clean it and affordable energy, life on land, which means like deforestation focus, and life underwater. So protecting ocean wildlife and trying to keep plastics out of the ocean. But a lot of people use us for that, but also because we do a lot of something called shareholder advocacy. And that's when you use your leverage as a shareholder to voice your concerns to companies. We tend to go more than just voice our concerns. We're really pushing companies to make changes that improve the environment. So, not just to protect them against what we think are financial and material risks and threats, but also to deliver, real impact. Because I don't know about all of you and Yasu, but I think a lot of people want to do sustainable investing because they want to see a change in the world and they want to make the place, cleaner and healthier and safer. And so that's what we're focused on, whether we're protecting forests or reducing plastics or just getting the ability to fix your stuff, like your right to repair. That's a concept out there we've worked on. And the third is that we were founded and we're still owned by nonprofits. And what that means is that 100% of our net profits belong to them, so they can use them to run their campaigns. There are state-based groups called the Public Interest Research Groups, or yet another acronym, PIRGs. Not the greatest acronym, but that's what it is. And they've been around since the '70s, working at state level and at the federal level to work on some of the same issues that I was talking about, like getting rid of toxic pesticides, preserving parks and wild areas, and doing some consumer protection and good governance things. So that's Green Century. We're one of the early ones, one of the pioneers in the sustainable investing space, and we've remained independent all this time.
Yeah, Leslie, just for our audience members to know, when you started with Green Century and up until today, you also elevated Green Century's platform. I believe you are, in the Forbes 50 under 50, and then you're also on Barron's 100 most influential women in the group. So you have some accolades, Leslie. Like you're kind of on that rock
Thank
star,
you.
status.
Also, I wish it was 50 under 50. It's 50 over 50.
There we go. I was trying to help you out there. Uh,
I'll take it anyway. Yeah, that was such a cool event. It was at the Rainbow Room in New York City, um, and it was just full of amazing women, and I don't really know how I got the awards. Editors and people pick you for it, but yeah, I was on the Barron's Most Influential Women in Finance for 2 years running.
Yeah, that's amazing. So Leslie's also frequented on the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Forbes, Bloomberg. I mean, you'll see her in the media. So this is she's done a lot to elevate Green Century's mission. So I want to kind of thank her for that and her services also to just sustainable investing in general. You put a lot of good work in there, and you've gotten companies to change their
Mhm.
behaviors, which is really really hard to do. So I hope our audience members appreciate that. Now, Leslie, we are going to move on to the weekly recap and talk a little bit about what happened this past week. And so there was this week we're going to focus more on sustainable investing news. We typically cover broad market categories, but it's just pretty much been the same. It's inflation, the war in Iran, and that's pretty much what dominates the conversation. But what's really interesting for audience members is there's a lot of happening on the sustainability front, and it's kind of I would say it's not as inactive as folks would appreciate. So yeah, this past week, the Wall Street Journal covered a story on this is the net zero pledges that a lot of major companies had put forth. And particularly, there was an academic paper, actually, it was two academic papers that came out showing that climate commitments are measurably reducing deforestation and long term emissions, even though some of them kind of don't work. And so what was interesting about it was it was the Journal of Nature that put out these research reports saying that when corporations purchase carbon credits to protect forests, sometimes those carbon credits are only as good as the developer that they're purchasing on can protect those forests. And sometimes that doesn't work out. But then the other report said that sometimes it does because it brings a lot of attention. So it brings a lot of attention to the issue, to the area, and it does protect forests, and it is almost like a deterrent for companies wanting to go in and maybe go to the Amazon and cut a bunch of rainforest down for farmland. It becomes a deterrent. So that was a really interesting aspect of almost like a net. It's not a win but not a loss in
Right.
the in the deforestation area. So have you guys done any work on that? And do you have any thoughts?
We've worked on deforestation for over a decade, less from the carbon credit point of view, and work, but more actually, wh which is okay, but again, it has mixed results. It can send a market signal, that's important. It might protect areas that otherwise would not have been protected. The obviously downside is if you're sending you're selling credits for an area that's already been protected, or like someone's double counting out there and it's not really having an impact. We've worked with companies more to actually adopt something called deforestation pledges. So growing palm oil, that's in Southeast Asia, or soy, that's more in Latin America and Brazil, to do that without burning and bulldozing down forests. That's a very direct way that corporations have made an impact. That plus government policy. So Indonesia's deforestation rates have been going down significantly in the last 15 years. And part of it was the corporate work that we and others did, and part of it was the government policy to put a moratorium on building new plantations. That's a little bit under threat now as there's a new agricultural initiative happening in Indonesia, and we actually are working with um, mostly European and other global investors to try to demonstrate that investors actually care about protecting these. Remember, like when you're young, the lungs of the earth? That's
Yeah.
what they called rainforests. They hold a lot of carbon, they process a lot of carbon, and when you burn them, it actually releases a lot of carbon, and then you don't have the forest to do that carbon capturing process that they do. And it sends like 10,000 people to, or used to 10,000 people to hospitals because it just literally they set them on fire and the smoke would carry as far as Singapore down there. So that I feel is one of the most direct ways, especially in other countries that where companies can play a real role. They can adopt these deforestation pledges throughout their supply chain, or banks, which we've worked on also, that they can make pledges not to lend money to companies that are involved in deforestation projects. So deforestation has gotten a lot, that plus biodiversity risk has really finally caught on here in the last couple years as a real material threat, and it has a direct link to climate change. And as you and all the viewers know, climate risk is an actual real material threat to companies that whether no matter what side of the aisle you're sitting on, companies are incorporating it and investors are factoring it in to their choices too.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, when I was younger, I didn't appreciate how much influence companies have on their supply chains until I got into the sustainable investing space. And it's not impossible to tell your supply chain, "Hey, if you want our business, well, you gotta do things a certain way." And getting the companies to take that initiative on does take the investor voice to push them in that direction, or else, they're gonna think about, "How do I maximize returns for my shareholders?" Right? And slashing and burning is, like, the cheapest way to do it, right? So, to have investors like yourself, and I'm sure you had partners in, the government on policy and other NGOs, working with you, Leslie. It was like it's a pretty big achievement to to get these like multi-billion dollar industries to change their supply chain practices.
Yeah. It doesn't happen overnight, but when you win, it's worth it. Um, and then there's a lot of follow-up. Like we spend time holding the companies to their commitments, which is an important part of any kind of shareholder engagement. The wins get the headlines, but it's the implementation where, the rubber really hits the road, so to speak.
Yeah, I imagine it's like a relationship, right? Your partner is like, "Oh, well, I promise not to do this," and then you're like, "All right, well, did you stop doing it? Did you stop doing it?"
It's not quite that loose for us. Maybe for some it is. And for some, firms will talk about how we're really working in partnership with companies. And, we certainly do with companies that have adopted the policies and are, truly committed to them. But sometimes they need more than just a suggestion. They need to be urged to do these things. And so we take a more assertive approach, I would say. And if the company is not addressing the risk that we've identified, we will file a shareholder proposal, and then sometimes that will get them to the table to take the negotiations more seriously. Or like we've been presenting shareholder proposals just the last couple weeks, and next week is the final week for ours. This is like the height of shareholder season, so this episode's coming at a really cool time where shareholders get to vote on what they think about these issues. So we filed, I think this will be the fourth year we filed the most environmental proposals of any firm, because sometimes they'll just listen to you, and then sometimes they need that. It's like the carrot and stick. They need the stick. They hate shareholder resolutions to be on their proxy. So they have a lot of incentive to get rid of them through a negotiated thing. But we make them sign an agreement. We don't just like do it over a handshake, and we want the agreement to be public. So it's not just for Green Century and Green Century's investors, but all investors to know what their plan is.
Do you wanna just talk about the shareholder resolution process and why it's so impactful to the companies that we own? I mean, so for some of our audience members, they've heard of proxy voting, but they don't really understand the functionality of it and why it's so effective. Do you wanna just kinda give them some insights, like why it's a tool you use to, get companies, to the table?
Yeah. We think of it as a escalation tactic. So first you always ask a company, you send them a letter, ask them for a meeting, you want to explain the concerns. Sometimes those meetings happen, and every once in a while they go, "Oh, we hadn't thought about that," or "Actually, we have been thinking about that, and this is what we are planning to do." And every once in a while the stars align, and you're like, "That's great. That's what we were thinking you should do too." More often than not, the stars are not quite lined up, and so then we, ask them for something more, and we might say, if this isn't if you're not able to agree to this, we're gonna file a resolution. And you usually do that in the fall, and then the time between the fall and now is when you can do more negotiations with the company, basically until that proxy is printed. And most of the questions, as people have seen, are about approving boards of directors or audit firms or some mechanics around the governance, or but any of the other questions that appear, and those are the ones that appear near the after those first questions the company puts on. Those are the ones that some investor, some shareholder has put forth, and they're not binding. But if you get a strong vote, then it's a signal to the company that, it's not just the filer or that shareholder that cares, like broader community cares. And it's another leverage point. So you use that to go back and negotiate again with them and see, like, this is the percentage of shareholders that care about this. You really should take this into account. And sometimes that works in one season, and sometimes, it takes two or three to, get this, not only the sustainability people on board, but then the supply chain people. And then sometimes those people use it as leverage internally to say, like, we think we need to be reducing our plastic packaging. And now investors are asking us about this too. So they have more backing to use internally to put forward the process. Um,
I bet you
so
the sustainability folks really love you, like, the inside the companies, like because 'cause you're raising issues that they're either working on or because there's no a lot of times, the shareholder resolutions are on topics about risk mitigation instead of, like, maybe revenue generation or profit, increasing margins, so the sustainability team members are looked at from the executive team as, like, almost like a cost center. So when you come and you say, "Hey, this is an issue that matters," and they were like, I don't say secretly working on it, but they were like, they're very aware of
yeah,
their environmental impact. They probably love you when you bring up these topics to management.
I think we give them more, ammunition, though I hate to use that word exactly, but more um,
Wait,
backing. Wait, yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. So that they can make the case So it's not just their voice. It's like, oh, and then now there's investors. And then if it goes to a vote, it's like we do brief all the top institutional shareholders, or we try to also get them to bring that forward in their conversations or to vote in favor of the resolution. And so it does give them that extra input, so it's not just them saying it internally, and there's these other pieces happening. We Green Century also does media around this to the extent we can get it covered in sustainability publications or just, trade publications or just broader media outlets so that it gets more notice, and companies generally don't think like all publicity is good publicity. So, yeah, we're really trying to leverage it and back up the sustainability people who have answers a lot of the time to these issues, but they have to make the case.
I think the other impact you have, so for folks on the audience that don't know the shareholder resolution process well, it shows up on the proxy, which happens during the annual general meeting of a company. And it's the board who has to respond to the resolution. So it's not just management, taking the reins, even though they probably do most of the work, but the board is putting their name on the line with regards to the resolution, saying either most of the times they don't support it, or else it won't make it to the resolution, or it won't make it to the proxy card. And so you're elevating the environmental health and safety team's issue to the board, and that could be very impactful for that team, career wise, impact wise, and the board has to come up with a response on whether they want to move forward with this or not. And if they don't, well, they got to answer to the shareholders why they think management's response is a better, or management's preferred point of view is much better than what the investors are bringing up, a la Green Century.
Yeah. The annual meetings are really beautiful thing. It's the one time that any shareholder can go and actually see and hear the chair and the board of directors. A lot of them went virtual during COVID, and fortunately, most have stayed that way. But if they're in person, it's particularly great because not that many shareholders go, and then you present your proposal, you get 2 minutes to talk about it, but then it's the afterward piece that you actually can go up and talk to the directors more, and sometimes we have not quite, like, finalized a deal then, but made a lot of progress just by being in the room, not just with the sustainability team or the investor relations people or other senior executives, but also the board. And, not all board members are paying attention to every single issue that's coming forward on the ballot. So it's important. It's one of the shareholder rights you have is to be able to put a question on the ballot. There's a few individuals who do this consistently every year. They're not with the firm. They just own a lot of shares, and they're prolific filers to try to bring the issues up to a wide range of companies. So if you are ever asked to, vote on proxies for your clients, there's other resources out there that you can use to figure out how you would vote if you wanted to support sustainability. Most of them are like pretty obvious what you would do too, though.
Yeah, I think also, Leslie, even though some of those board members may not be paying attention, or kind of don't put that much weight on the actual resolution. What they do care about is their vote percentage, and they look at other board members' vote percentages. And if you piss off enough investors, that vote percentage for goes down, and they don't like that. That freaks them out. So, it's a tightrope that these board members have to walk, and they're at the service of the shareholders. Like, just for audience members to remember, these are publicly traded companies. They're basically using your dollars to run the company, and so they need to listen to you. And if they don't, well, you have a very, very powerful way of saying, I don't like where leadership is going, and it's by voting against the board directors.
Yep. Other firms have taken on those campaigns, and, like, if you do this for a couple years and the board and the company are not responding in a way that is moving you toward what you think it needs to get addressed, you can run director campaigns. We don't do that at the moment, but other, especially nonprofits have done it.
Yeah, I mean, Green Century has a pretty well-oiled machine when it comes to shareholder resolutions, and a lot of other firms look to look to how you do it and try to replicate it, Leslie. So good on for you all for perfecting that system.
Thanks. Yeah. We have 4 people who do it out of, a smaller firm, so it's a top priority for us. It's again, it's the way that an advisor can show their clients, what their investments are doing in the real world. So, a lot of the advisors and I think find the stories about it really helpful to translate what sustainable investing can do to those clients who, they meet an hour a year maybe with their advisor. They just need a couple stories that will resonate with them and they'll remember. And then they feel good about it, which is especially important if it's a down market or a volatile market and, you know, the returns aren't a strong point of conversation that year.
That's a really important point you bring up, Leslie, because there's this is something I've talked a lot about on our podcast. There's this great wealth transfer that's happening, and I think last week, what was it? It was like one third of baby boomers have transferred at least some of those assets to the next generation. And that next generation, the millennials and the Gen Zers and, Gen Y and all the others, they're gonna be inheriting a lot of wealth, whether it's in the form of a house or, stocks and bonds and whatnot. But that next generation, they don't wanna use their parents' financial advisors for various reasons. One being they don't feel like they are in touch with them, and this next generation, like, they actually care about the environment. Like, they
They
really do,
do.
Like, and so if you have, aging clients and you're trying to capture that next generation because you don't want your book to shrink, yeah, you need to be well versed in these matters, these issues, and getting your clients some exposure to something that either Green Century or other players in the space do on environmental issues, some things that are just non-traditional aspects of like investment management. It could bridge that communication gap or that relationship gap that you have with your clients' next generation. And it's really important to be knowledgeable and be able to speak on these types of topics and what solutions you can provide for the end client. So, yeah, it's a really important move of money that's happening, and there's a lot of advisors who are not prepared for that next generation that do need to. And looking at what you guys do in the space would be very helpful to capture that interest of that next generation.
Yeah, and you don't have to completely change your practice. You don't have to switch from whatever it is to all sustainable investing. You need to have you need to be, you know, fluent in it and just have some options on hand. And if I can make a plug for USSIF has a set of 3 guides. They're called roadmaps, and they're roadmaps for financial advisors, and they're free resources that you can get to learn more, like, what is this sustainable investing? What is ESG? What's impact? What's this? What's that? And you can get up to speed fairly quickly, as well as there are people like Yasu or myself or others that have other resources and are willing to just spend a little bit of time with you to, connect you to other RAs and advisors out there who know this and have been through it because those people, I think, have successfully navigated this wealth transfer. I just was meeting with an advisor in New York City, and he just talked about how he's managing now the money of the kids since the parents are getting older. And he can address the issues that they care about through their investments, and so he's gonna hold on to those assets and clients. Yeah, and you don't wanna lose them.
Especially in this environment where a lot of advisors are looking to retire and sell their books to other advisors, but If if 80% of your book is over, 70 years old and there's no relationship with the next generation, like that book is almost unpurchasable. So yeah, you're right, Leslie. You hit the nail right on the head. You do need to navigate this in a thoughtful way. So it works though.
Yeah. The the worst answer is when someone comes in and says, "Oh, I'm kinda interested in, avoiding tobacco," or, "I'm not sure I really wanna, invest in fossil fuels anymore." And if you say, "Oh, well, you're gonna lose money if you do that. You shouldn't do that." I have seen, it doesn't happen in like a big hullabaloo, but then they leave after a a little bit of that because you're not listening to them and you're not providing them what they're asking for. And, obviously that's your job is to serve your clients, and you can do it in a financially responsible way.
You never know where your client's gonna get their information from. The next generation is so social media savvy that they might see a TikTok that really resonates with them, and or they might be caught in an algorithm that just really knows them very well, and they're gonna come to you as their financial advisor and say, "I have a problem. Can you solve this problem?" And if your answer is no, well, they're gonna find somebody who can solve their problem. It's as simple as that.
Yeah. And you don't want right? You don't want to be in that spot. You want to know as much as you can. And again, you don't need to be a complete expert in it. There are ways to get well versed enough that you don't have to just shut them down, or you just go like, "That's a great idea. Like, let me get back to you." And then you listen to this podcast again and you remember you can go to USIF and get these roadmaps, and then Yasu can connect you to me or other people he knows in the field to go like, "Oh, here's some people you should talk to get some, more information about how to understand and navigate this."
I love repeat audience members. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps the algorithm.
That's right, do that right now. Uh,
Yeah, that was wonderful. So moving on to the midweek this week, the Wall Street Journal reported on a new bipartisan like Senate bill that's making its way through Congress, and it's offering a 30% investment tax credit for data centers and industrial sites that are related. But really, it's focusing on building water infrastructure. And I don't think folks in the audience really appreciate how much water these data centers need. We went through this back in the early 2000s and sorry, the mid 2000s actually, when Google and Microsoft and other Oracle were moving everything to the cloud. So they had to create these massive data centers that needed a lot of water to cool their application or their hardware down. Well, guess what? It's back, and these AI data centers are even more massive. Some of them are starting to become, the size of like townships, which is kind of crazy. But that's coming. That's making its way through the rounds on the policy matters, where 60% of the U.S., at least in the article, said 60% of the U.S. is enduring drought conditions. So these are going to become table topics to neighborhoods where your water infrastructure. I guarantee you. I shouldn't guarantee you, but I remember we were investing in these water utilities, and they were giving us some crazy stats. Like almost every water infrastructure that's out there that isn't part of a major urban city is just failing, and there's not enough investments going into improving the water infrastructure. So you want to add more stress on top of that with a massive AI data center. Well, then there's going to be some tough choices that need to be made at the local level. So these are going to be tabletop, dinner issues that are going to start popping up in the next, 6 months to a year, and it's a massive capital expenditure that's going to need to happen. But who's going to foot the bill? Is it going to be the data centers? Is it going to be the localities? It's unclear, but
yeah.
you all should be aware of those conversations and the issue that's coming up because water is really important. I've always said this: if you want to have a successful society, you need easy access to water, food, and energy. And if one of those is not cheap, then it's going to be really hard to have a successful society. So. That was this Wednesday. Do you focus on any water issues in the, like domestic water issues, Leslie, with the Green Century funds?
A little bit. We have started talking to a lot of the companies about the environmental impacts of their use of AI, and particularly around these data centers. Also, urging them not to turn to nuclear at the same time. But, personally, I don't think that a company's quest for AI should endanger people's access to clean and affordable water. And that's really important. Unfortunately, water infrastructure isn't a very sexy policy issue and never has been. And so a lot of water infrastructure is old and needs to be updated and replaced. And this is just going to put an incredible strain on it. But there is this quote around, like, the next war is going to be fought around water. So, I'm not wishing for another war, and we don't want that around water, but that is not an infinite resource, especially as climate change makes climate really unpredictable, and these droughts and these wildfires that are happening at these incredible rates because of the droughts, it's a lot of pressure, and so that is one of the issues we're gonna keep elevating next year with, all the tech companies that we invest in and others who are just spending massive amounts of money on this, almost just like throwing money at this to try to stay ahead, get ahead. It's not a really good trade-off. I mean, I think it's great AI can get rid of some really unfulfilling tasks and jobs for people. That part's great, but the environmental impact is we really need to push back and make sure that, the public is not bearing the burden of a company's quest for AI.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. Again, it's the same conversation we were having in the mid 2000s, or 2010, mid-teen 2000s, I should say, where a company sucks up a massive amount of resources, and then there's a pushback, and then the company changes. But you need somebody to push that company to make that change, or else they're going to go down the cheapest route to maximize their shareholder returns. Right. So we saw it before with the cloud data centers, and we're seeing it again with the AI data centers. But the AI data centers are way bigger than the than the
Yeah,
already existing
or a
cloud
different
ones.
scale.
Yep. Yep, and it's interesting because it also bled into Friday's news, which, talked about, water usage with Oracle, and Oracle recently had to scrap plans for a natural gas plant, that was gonna power their New Mexico site. Instead, they switched over to using Bloom Energy for their fuel cell technology, so they could reduce their water usage. So that just goes in to show you that companies are immediately becoming sensitive to their water usage. And yeah, even though like they scrapped a water plant, Bloom still uses natural gas to power their fuel cells, but it's at a much lower rate. So folks are becoming sensitive to the issue, and they're starting to understand the impact.
Yeah. I mean, fracking and getting gas out of the earth also, can really be one uses a lot of water, and then it produces very toxic water that can leak. The pits that they need to line the pits so the toxic water doesn't seep into the aquifers, and sometimes that's not sufficient. So there's a lot of threats to water all around. And it's certainly an issue we have been increasingly focused on. We used to focus on it when we did invest in gas, and we're very focused on the environmental impacts of fracking. Now that we don't invest in gas anymore, it's AI and just other companies that are using lots and lots of water.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like it's really good when you got it, but then when it's gone, it's really bad. And the water is one of those things where you just don't want it to be at risk. Like you want to be able to open up your tap and get like a glass of water or make some tea or boil some spaghetti. You don't want,
Right. Yeah.
weird things popping up in your water when you're like forever chemicals or,
Mhm.
whatever else. You want to be able to wash your baby in the bathtub without worrying about poisoning them, right? It's good when you got it, but it's terrible when it's gone.
Right. You kinda don't realize it. You're just so used to here in the US being able to turn on the tap and have it be pretty safe.
Yeah, yeah. So that was our weekly update. I wanna kinda tap into this kinda theme I have for my podcast, which is there's a lot of great people that work in the investment advisory industry. They're doing, like, fantastic things, but they don't get much sunlight. You're not one of those, Leslie. You all you're definitely well known in the space. But the work that you do is sometimes it can be almost like a thankless job because you're doing so much. And so I like to kind of highlight the overall work that you've been doing on the advocacy side and kind of tap into this narrative that's playing out these days where folks are saying like sustainable investing is kind of dead and the space is dead and it's just like a bunch of like three little words that are not as effective as folks want it to be. I disagree with that notion, and I want you to like kind of walk us through your thoughts on that kinda like narrative of the sustainable investing being dead, why it's not, and like why it's like really important nowadays to, at least be knowledgeable about what's going on in sustainable investing, if not be involved in it.
Yeah. It's alive and well. Um, the headlines might indicate a different story, but really what's happened is over the last 10 years, there was a you see my hand coming in. There
Yeah,
was a
yeah.
there was a growth, and when the bigger firms realized that if you incorporated the risk factors of environmental, social, or governance issues, you actually you should integrate it into your investments. It has nothing to do with making an environmental impact or a social impact, really. Um, that it was widely adopted, and when they saw that there was a market for it, a lot of firms, BlackRock to State Street to Vanguard, like, adopted this as their, new revenue stream, and people responded. What's happened is when this attack on ESG has happened, it's just a lot of times it's really driven in part by the fossil fuel divestment campaign and its origins, and then misunderstanding what ESG data does, which again is just a risk metric that might improve performance. It doesn't have any, you know, environmental or social impact in the real world necessarily. So but companies and investment firms who aren't committed to it have scrubbed the acronym ESG off their websites in the last couple of years, have renamed their funds, have gone back to their fund that used to just be a regular fund, and then they called it sustainable. Now they're calling it just a regular fund. So it gives the perception that people aren't as interested anymore, but they are, and they're almost more interested at the individual level because they're looking for a way to make an impact. They feel, thwarted by that, whether at the state or federal level on the issues they care about. Um, and so, maybe they don't bike to work every day, but that's not feasible for, a set of people, but they can invest part of their money this way. And that's how they're looking to make an impact. And so if are, you don't know unless you ask your clients. So it's less common for someone to come in and go, okay, I want to change my investment portfolio, and I just don't want to be associated with companies that are involved in animal welfare or this social impact issue or this. It's more that when you ask them, like, well, what are your hobbies? Who are you giving money to? What would you like to spend your time on? Or you give them a survey and just have them check off the issues they care about. including like, are you interested in learning more about sustainable investing? That's when the aha moment comes because all of a sudden you realize, oh, I've never even asked about this. And, or I've only talked to the guy in the family or whoever's making the money decisions. And this other person actually cares a lot about it. And it's like a risk for your practice to know something about it and be able to have the conversation. Again, you don't have to know everything, but a lot of money is still flowing in. A lot of money is sticking in there. It's a very sticky investment for most of the firms in this space. And people more and more are looking, I'd say the growth areas are around community investing. So people are very drawn to something they can invest in small amounts of money, invest in their state or city where they can see the impact. Or, if you have a, a family that has more assets and they're not just in public equities and bonds, that they might be looking at some small allocation to private equities, like a cool company that's doing solar stoves somewhere else in the country. I mean, people love those stories. And so, you're never going to allocate a ton of money, but there are funds and investments out there that are vetted. Some of them don't have concessionary returns. Some of them have, okay market returns too. So it's I'm going into more specifics on how it plays out at the advisor level, but I mean, we're not going anywhere. We're about to hit our highest AUM, and certainly some of it's the market, but some of it is people are still investing with us and they're still investing with our, colleagues slash competitors across the field too. So this is where, don't believe everything you read comes into play. It's a very active community out there. It's a little quieter now with the big firms pulling back. And so I wouldn't necessarily look to them for more options. They have some, but they're kind of a very lighter touch in most instances.
Well, you bring up a good point about having conversations with your clients, Leslie, because the way the advisor world is moving is away from managing clients' assets in a portfolio. So actually being like the asset manager for your clients, like I'm gonna put your money in this stock or I'm gonna put your money in that stock. And it's moving more towards planning. Um, Planning is the part where they make the deepest connections with their clients, or another an industry term would be like stickiness. That's where the stickiness comes from. And so, if you are able to plan, that means you're able to have a good conversation with your clients, and understanding how to answer these kinds of questions is going to become even more important going forward if you want to retain those clients. And again, you know, the next generation, they care about these issues, and that's where your growth's gonna come from. So you need to be prepared to at least offer some kind of solution, or start getting educated on what you can provide from a sustainable investing standpoint to those clients. And, that could be talking to, I don't know, your custodian or talking to your home office, but you need to get educated, um, if you're starting to take on the newer generation of clients. And there, yes, you're right. There are managers out there who have dropped the promotionary aspect of their marketing on their sustainable investing, but then there's folks who haven't, right? Folks who are still doing and still executing the same way as they were before the massive tailwind of assets came in, and they're going to continue to do so to service their clients who come to them for these types of sustainable solutions. And I doubt that's gonna change,
I don't think
regardless of the
so.
environment.
The other thing we've seen is that if you're sitting there thinking like, I don't have that many younger clients, like I have an older client set. What we've seen is, grandparents who care now are thinking about their legacy in broader terms they're concerned about climate or nature or just clean air, they are setting up investments for their grandkids that mirror those values as a way to teach them about investing, but also about, bigger issues, and want to leave them sort of a world that is better than it is now. And so I think one of the cutest things is grandparents setting up IRAs or SEPs for, something for their grandkids, and then going, "Do you have a brochure to explain Green Century to them? Because I wanna show them, what they're invested in." And so that's just a nut it's there are different generational opportunities. I don't know any grandparent that has done that with us or others that doesn't feel good about it. So they're giving more than, not just money, but they're giving more than money. You're giving money and some values to them. So there's little opportunities everywhere to introduce it into your practice in a way that, again, is not that hard.
Yeah, one if you're interested in learning more, I mean, there's resources out there. I think Leslie, you no, I think I know you mentioned earlier, the road map that USIP produces. I also want to give a plug out to my buddy Peter Kroll. He also has this book out. It's called The Sustainable Investor, and Peter Kroll is he's an RIA. And if you want to don't want to commit to something that big, you can always, yep, there it is, The Sustainable Investor. You could always, buy the book, and it's actually a pretty good read for folks. And
Pretty
you know,
good read. Um, I have extra copies. I mean, I should encourage you to buy one, but I also have copies for free that we give to advisors who are trying to learn about the space. We also have a guide that we put out with a nonprofit called Green America, and it's a guide to fossil fuel free investing. And so you can use it or you could give it to your clients. There's a lot of resources out there that are free.
yeah, yeah. I like to end the show, Leslie, on my favorite question, which is, what are you looking forward to next week?
I am looking forward to a couple things. One, I just was on the road, well, here in Boston and New York City, meeting some new advisors, and next week I have some meetings set up with them to talk exactly about this. How could they do more sustainable investing in their practice? So that's one. That's always fun for me to talk to advisors. Two, we have the last of our shareholder resolutions going to the ballot. And so one of our shareholder advocates is actually traveling down to Virginia to go to the Markel, it's an insurance company, um, annual meeting to talk about them, looking more at climate change, and not offering insurance to new fossil fuel projects. That's the ultimate goal. And then three, I'm looking forward to the warmer weather here. I'm in Boston. It's a rainy day. Looking out at my garden, the squirrel looking for all the acorns that it thinks it's buried last year. So just getting out there and pulling up some weeds and cleaning it up.
Well, I want to thank you, Leslie, for joining us for this wonderful episode of Inside the Flows. If audience members, if you're an FA or FP, an asset manager, anyone in the RA space, and you want to continue the conversation, please join Inflows. It's free to join. It's free to use. We've been updating the platform quite a bit lately. You'll find a lot of useful new tools in there. And I'll be posting this podcast also in Inflows if you want to keep the conversation going, or if you have a question you want to ask Leslie. Feel free to drop in and ask your question, and we'll try to get you an answer as soon as we can. But go ahead and join Inflows. Again, I want to thank Leslie. Leslie, if people want to know a little bit more about Green Century, where should they go for more information?
They can go to our website, greencentury.com. They can email me, lsamuelrich@greencentury.com. Or they can give me a call at my Zoom phone is 781 349-2830.
All right. Thank you, Leslie. It's been amazing having you on here. I'm really pumped to be able to put this show out, and good luck on the rest of your shareholder resolutions.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for having me.